von Kolumbia in dem theologischen Seminar. Nachdem mit seiner letzten offiziellen Session wegen dem jiddischen und dem balkanischen Tag. Aber gegenständig kommt nachdem, weil wir dann noch verweilt werden, von Eleanor Brzezowski, ich weiß nicht, ich richtig organisieren, singen, ja, Titelspruch, welches dann das Team, aber sie wird in Zusammenhang mit Akreisenden ist gegenständig, hat dann nur ein bisschen auf den Tag in Adam vernommen. Jetzt in den Mikrofon שולי.
Okay. So I'll just introduce myself for a minute. I'm שולי Berger. I'm the curator of special collections at Yiddish University. I'm honored to be here with library colleagues and Yiddish colleagues. And thank you for organizing this conference in memory of Dr. שעכטער. So I was a student of Dr. שעכטעr's at Columbia. One of my fondest memories of his class was our daily ritual, was herzlich nice. What's new? So people will wonder what can possibly be new in the world of archives. We're going to have four distinguished librarians and archivists are about to tell us. So our first presenter is Michelle Margolis. She is the Norman E. Alexander Librarian for Jewish Studies at Columbia University and the president of the Association of Jewish Libraries. She co-directs Footprints, Jewish Books Through Time and Place, and serves on the advisory board of Jewish Studies and Digital Humanities, among other organizations. Michelle was part of the team to redigitize the transcripts from the language and culture archives of Ashkenazic Jewry. Her fields of interest are Jewish book history and the intersection of Jewish studies with digital scholarship. And she is one of the editors of the recently published volume, Jewish Studies in the Digital Age. Her topic is Yiddish, Columbia, and mid-20th century digital humanities. Thank you, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. So nice to be here. Columbia has long been known for its Yiddish program, probably for nearly a century. Home of the famous Language and Culture Atlas of Ashkenazic Jewry, and for many years, the Yiddish program. Columbia was one of the few institutions to which Aaron Lansky's eulogy for Yiddish collections did not apply. Our libraries collected Yiddish early and continuously, and there were no mass deaccessionings of Yiddish materials from our collection. On the contrary, rare and unusual Yiddish materials are sometimes found in the general stacks. Milgram, anyone? Because they were acquired when they were produced and were not considered rare at the time. And in fact, just yesterday was perfect. A graduate student reached out to me to say that they were in the stacks and they found a Yiddish volume, that it was in very bad condition. What should they do with it? Because also our students look at our Yiddish collections in stacks. Less well known, though, is that the Columbia Yiddish program was one of the earliest adapters of computing in Jewish studies. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Judaica collecting was part of Columbia's history since its inception, and Yiddish was a part of that. In the mid-19th century, for example, Henry Livingston Thomas, a translator for President Grover Cleveland's State Department, donated a 1699 edition of the Koning Arthur Hof, facing Yiddish and its transliteration into German for German-speaking Christian scholars who wanted to learn Yiddish as a way to become familiar with Hebrew. J.N. Hazard donated a Shoyashviel and a Sefer Arrhenius that included Yiddish miscellanies in 1896. And Benjamin Stern and Charles A. Dunn's donations in the late 19th century included a Judeo-Alsatian book of funerary rites called Mein Zoren. Many of our rare Yiddish imprints come from a collection sold at Amsterdam in 1868 that included the libraries of Giuseppe Almanzi of Padua, Jacob Emden of Altena, and S.D. Lowenstein of Suriname, like this Hebrew, German, Italian, Latin phrasebook made for refugees following the Khmelnytsky massacres of 1648 and 49. And when showing multilingual dictionaries, I can't help but show this Ladino English Yiddish dictionary printed by the Ladino paper La America in the early 20th century. Within the university itself, bits and pieces of Yiddish appear in the archives from the beginning of the 20th century. As Sonia Gallant has shown, David Pinsky was a student at Columbia in 1903, taking classes in the Germanic Language and Literature department, although his theatrical success was such that he dropped out before completing his degree. A rumor of Columbia's instruction of Yiddish in 1916, incidentally, the year that the University of Washington first started giving courses, has not been substantiated in Columbia's archives, although I am grateful to Colin Weiser for referring me to the reference in the American Jewish Yearbook about a course for that year. The only reference to Yiddish in Columbia's sources, though, that I have been able to find, is an article in the Columbia Spectator about evening courses on obtaining citizenship from the university, which were advertised in Yiddish language that same year. And I have to point out, if anybody knows where this clipping is from, I have a copy of it. It is not in any of the digitized newspapers of the Jewish Historical Press Project, and I would love to get a citation for it. In 1952, Yiddish scholarship at Columbia in Morningside Heights, and I might venture to say in the academy in general, was forever changed with the establishment of the actual professorship of Yiddish language, literature, and culture at Columbia. The famous Morgan Journal cartoon from March 16, 1952 shows the excitement of the Yiddish community at this development, and the chair's first incumbent, Uriel Weinreich, wasted no time in setting up Yiddish studies at the university. But it would be his project to map the diversity of spoken Yiddish that would serve to solidify Columbia's place in the world of Yiddish studies, and, perhaps unexpectedly, in humanities computing in the field of Jewish studies. The gathering of data for the Language and Culture Atlas of Ashkenazic Jewry began almost immediately after Weinreich's arrival at Columbia. The very first data was recorded in standard blue books, and the earliest sound recordings were on wire, with a swift shift to reel-to-reel tapes within a few years. Weinreich and his team collated a questionnaire of hundreds of questions and set out to interview what would become about 600 people whose origins were scattered across the Yiddish-speaking world. And this is a map for how one made Simas. Time was of the essence, as original speakers would be growing older, and the recent harmony was very present in the minds of researchers on the project. I'll give you a minute to read this letter, and especially the end. I trust, however, that you will not consider it discourteous if, before we pursue the matter further, I request that you furnish me with the details of your status and activities in Germany between the years 1933 and 1945. This was a letter from Herzog to a German professor who had asked him about research in the field. And this was something that Uriel Weinreich did as well, something that Max Weinreich did as well. This was very much something that they held together. In putting together the PowerPoint for this talk, I found a different letter from Max Weinreich in which he said he was offered an award by a linguistics conference in Germany. And he said, I understand that some of the other people who are going to be there are people who are Nazis. And so I will not come and get this award for you all. So this was the response. I am a student of philology and I was born in 1943. As this is a conference celebrating Mordechai Schechter, I should note that when we digitized the data transcripts of the interviews, Schechter was the most prolific interviewer by quite a long shot. And if you look at the numbers, these are actually pages. It's a little bit hard to say how many interviews he did based on this, because these are numbers of pages digitized. But the next number below 38,000 is 16,000. So he did at least twice as much as the next person.
Do we know who EG is?
Yeah, it's all here. Oh, yeah. To me, though, an underemphasized aspect of the project was the digital piece. In 1961, Uriel Weinreich managed to secure funding from the American Philosophical Society, quote, for the purpose of key punching, programming, services of a machine operator, and consultation on research design, end quote, in the creation of the Language and Culture Atlas of Ashkenazic Jewry, which I'll call the LCAJ moving forward. A proposal for use of brand new IBM 1790 computer at Columbia from around 1960 shows a request for 200,000 cards and 500 hours of machine use at the newly installed Watson Scientific Laboratory at Columbia University. As Weinreich himself noted in, quote, in the title of this piece was Machine Aids in the Compilation of Linguistic Atlases, which he published in 1964, quote, when someone tries to visualize the editing of an atlas of many hundreds of maps with up to 500 locations on each, it becomes clear what advantages are gained by the electronic filing and sorting of the data. End quote. As noted in the 1963 application to the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, quote, Columbia University continues to make available its IBM 1090 computer and peripheral equipment. The project can count on using the SC4020 at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York for electronic plotting, end quote. For perspective, there were only 2 other projects active worldwide at the time that combined Jewish studies and computing. One on the Dead Sea Scrolls that began in 1958, and the Historical Dictionary of the Hebrew Language, which began in 1959. When Columbia Libraries received an NEH grant to digitize the data from the project, we found 3 different formats of data collection. At the very onset of the project, as noted earlier, answers to questions were written in blue books, the same ones used for exams even today. Relatively quickly, though, the project moved to a standard form. And as a librarian, here is like beautiful metadata in a clear and consistent manner. They knew what they were doing. So every question had a specific identification and page number, and thus could be located quickly. This allowed for ease of data entry into the computers, even in the 1960s, and produced the 12 boxes of computer printouts that we have in the collection. And if you look, do I have a pointer here? Yeah. So 040 is the page number, and then 300 is the question number. The interview code is basically sort of a mashup of the lat long of where the person came from. And then this is just the answer they were looking for. So they would say, what is the part of the street where people are meant to walk? And they were looking for a word for sidewalk. And so they had, in this case, that's not the right question, but in this, and then they would just write the actual word. But usually the answer would come in a long paragraph about how, yes, they built sidewalks, and once there was a goat that walked on the sidewalk. And so the cultural piece cannot be overemphasized. Of course, and this is sort of my favorite quote, data ages like wine, software ages like fish. And it's attributed to Andrew Hankinson. So when we made the decision to digitize the data, we had these. We don't have on campus an IBM 1060 anymore, unfortunately. We also didn't have all the cards. It was clear that we don't have all the cards. And so what we had to do was we had to perform optical character recognition, so OCR, on the printouts in order to obtain the data in a digital format that had already been digitized. And that's an example of my colleague, who's now retired, Bob Scott, did spend hundreds and hundreds of hours manually going through the OCR, correcting it so that you could do the kind of search that I did here to actually be able to search through those printouts. And the printouts, only about a third of the data was entered into the computer, so it's not the complete set, although it's a nice corpus. Computers at that time only allowed for letters of the standard alphabet, and so scholars on the project created their own transcription system to allow for the linguistic nuances obtained in interviews. And that's why when you look at the printouts, those are not words that you might recognize, because they would add a plus or a 2 or a 6 to indicate the different linguistic areas. So thus you'll see unusual transcriptions and various symbols which all combined to represent the various sounds. All in all, the 250 or so boxes containing the archives of the LCAJ project, and somewhat by extension, Yiddish at Columbia more broadly, contains myriads, early computing manuals, correspondence with just about everyone in the post-World War II Yiddish world, a bit of scandal, and of course, an incredible research for learning about the diversity of Yiddish based on geographic origin. The collection's finding aid, digitized audio, and the transcripts for the atlas are all available online and are ripe for further research. I was mentioning earlier today, we recently completed an inventory of the 1,000 or so maps that were created by the project, which we had in a couple of dozen boxes off-site. So if you want to look at the particular maps, you're interested in what the gefilte fish line was, or how can we make summas. You can come to our special collections and take a look. But Yiddish at Columbia did not begin and end with the LCAJ. The 1972 edition of Columbia College Today highlighted what they said was the first time that Yiddish was taught at Columbia College in the undergraduate program. Whether 1972 was indeed the first time Yiddish was taught to undergrads at Columbia is not clear. But its feature in the magazine showed that it had quite a vibrant presence at the university. And in the present day, pop culture references, both secular and Jewish, serve to keep students engaged and inspired by the study of Yiddish. I encourage you to take a look at our online finding aid, listen to the recorded interviews available via ADIS or the Columbia Libraries, and to learn more about the fantastic collections for research still untapped within our stacks. Yiddish is still an active collecting priority in the library, with a focus on older manuscripts as well as Yiddish theater in Europe. And I just want to point out this one because it's kind of amazing. This was various people milking the public. It was that both parties were terrible. But if you look underneath the word the public, this was actually originally created for a Yiddish paper. And Art Young then repurposed it for his own English language paper by sticking the English word on the top of his original. I will end by inviting you to come to our special collections to see a pop-up exhibit curated by recent graduate Donnie Goodman-Radner from our Zosa Zhakowski collection, all contemporary materials, I promise, to see the anti-fascist Yiddish children's drawings collected as part of his work in 1930s Paris. It is up in our Rare Book and Manuscript Library across from the circulation desk, so if you're locally based, it's definitely worth taking a look. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Yosef Weissman, was born in Chernovitz, Ukraine. He received a PhD in physical chemistry from the Russian Academy of Sciences and currently teaches bioinformatics and computational biology at George Mason University in Maryland. In 1994, he created the Virtual Shtetl, the first website dedicated to Yiddish language and culture. Since then, he has been lecturing at the International Association of Yiddish Clubs and other Yiddish conferences and festivals. He was also the moderator of Mendele, the online Yiddish list, for several years, and he was a longtime board member of Yiddish of Greater Washington and the International Association of Yiddish Clubs, of which he is president. What?
Was president.
Oh, okay, in the bio I have is added in. Okay, so thank you for working for the organization. And he'll be speaking to us now on building the worldwide shtetl, first steps of the Yiddish internet in the late 20th and early 21st century.
much for introduction, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me here to the beginning, to the end. And when I realized that I will be on the archives panel, I tweaked my presentation a little bit to fit the bill, and I think it actually follows very nicely what Michelle just was talking about, jumping 20 or so years ahead of IBM 1090, and in the 1981, the same company IBM started manufacturing another computer, IBM PC, and also another company, Radio Shack, was making a similar little box. And Apple joined the crowd in 1983, and so people got their computers at home, and well, they wanted to use them. They started joining the internet. I should mention here that in 1981, those first IBM PCs and TRS, which is Radio Shack computers, cost about $2,500 to $3,000. And for younger people in the audience, for $3,000 in 1981, you could buy a very decent used car, for example. So it was not really kind of immediately available to everybody. But by the 1980s, quite a few people already had computers or access to computers, and they started using the internet. So actually, before I go to that story, and since we are in the archives session, I'll show a part of my personal archive. And so those are photos. The quality is not great, but I think they're rare photos because mostly Shakhtar is dancing. Yeah, this is my Ocean Festival in 1997, and one of Moscow's grandchildren. I don't know.
I think that's been given on the lower right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Reina and that's me.
Yeah. This is in the office on West 72nd Street, and I'm proud that one of those pictures is used in Wikipedia article on Dr. Schechter. You can see a little bit more of background there, what you expect from the office of Yiddish. Celebration of 100th birthday featured over in 2004, and this is probably one of the last public events in which Moscow attended. It is a release of botanical dictionary in July of 2005. So, as an aspiring archivist, I sometimes preserve those little artifacts. I miss communicating with Murphy. He was serious but also playful, and you can see that this is an email from Motto Chernobyl to Yosef Chernobyl. So, 1988, people do have those computers, and there is even internet for some. Do you remember dial-up modems? 26 kilobits per second. So, well, people wanted to communicate, and they communicated in what in science we call pairwise manner. But then there was a need for group communication, for some kind of social networks. Interestingly, for groups that were at a disadvantage, like small groups or geographically dispersed groups, that would be even more important than for some other groups. So not surprisingly, Yiddish speakers, Yiddish lovers, were among the first to try to organize something like this, something like venue for online communication. And so the very first, as far as I know, group for online communication in Yiddish or about Yiddish was called Male Yiddish, was created by David Sherman from Toronto, and this is the first mailing, the first digest of male Yiddish list, October 1988. So this is the message from David himself, and this is the first email from participant from male Yiddish. Was master. Was the first phrase in Yiddish in group setting on the internet. Immediately or very soon afterwards, people started thinking about archiving the information, including those mailing lists. So Ariadne created a first depository on the resource called Well. So it was a proprietary small network, and so that was the first nascent Yiddish online archive. Since so male Yiddish existed, it was not very large or very active, but in 1991, Noah Miller, who was at Trinity College in Connecticut, started another mailing list, which was named after one of his foreign, called Mendele. And so this is an announcement of Mendele, May 15th, 1991, and there were 22 subscribers. So the list did grow fairly fast. So 5 years later, you can see there were more than 1,000 subscribers from a number of countries. So people really used it to communicate on a number of different topics, and I will show some examples. So another 5 years forward, and so Mendele had more than 2,000 subscribers on all continents except Antarctica, and from at least 36 countries, and you can see that those are countries with at least 5 subscribers. United States are not listed because all the rest were from the United States. Interestingly, so Mendele was used for like roster communication, but also it was an important academic tool. And if in the beginning, in 91, 21 out of 22 subscribers were from academic work, by 2000 the fraction dropped significantly, so it was probably 1/3 of all subscribers who were at the universities, but still many, more than 100 universities appeared in the email addresses of people who subscribed to Mendele, and so by name I listed the universities with more than 10 subscribers from each. So I wanted to show a sample of Mendele postings. My sample is not going to be representative. It actually will be a sample of postings from just one participant, but not an ordinary participant. So, and I think that those couple or several messages from Mordechai to Mendele are illustrative of many of the things that were already mentioned in this conference. There were definitely like linguistic questions and answers in this case about word organ, and people didn't know. So of course there was a discussion before that message. So prefix bar, and even so I don't know for sure, but I can clearly see, like, behind the screen, that those famous 3x5 cards were used to compose this message, because he provides a fair number of examples. And the next one is even more clear in using the cards, because again it's a word belief, and again it was a kind of very lively discussion about the origin of the word, and so Murphy said that it is not sufficient to just use his authority, so he provided a list of writers who used the word. Now, this is 1997, so it's before Google Books and before Yiddish Book Center OCR, so clearly either he remembered that those certain writers used this word, or he had this card catalog, which resulted in an answer. Now, again, these days it is something that can be produced by going to ocr.yiddishbookscenter.org. 25 years ago it wasn't the case, but still Moshe will produce the same results essentially. By training, by instincts, by his whole lifestyle, Mordechai שעכטער was a descriptivist in linguistics. But I am sure that in this case, he didn't have those words on his cards. He just came up with them the minute he sent this email. So we can see this prescriptivist side of him, and he did. I think in many cases he wouldn't shy away from saying this is a Yiddish word, or this should be the Yiddish word. Many people said that Mordechai was very kind of peaceful person, but nevertheless, in some cases when it was important, he wouldn't mind to say what he thought. And in this case, it was Michael Chabon's article in journal Civilizations. So, again, you can see it again on things that were important to him. He wouldn't stop from saying what he thought. And so the last one, I think, is time appropriate. Next month we will have a Yontif, and so if you are going to greet somebody, it shouldn't be a good Yontif Hanukkah. It should be hot, afraid of him. And again, there was a question in Mendel. So Mendel existed for 25 years, and several people participated in moderating it after originally. So Mendel started, and he was helped by Victor Bars. I used for a while. Kalman was moderator, and George Price from Columbia, and one of several Mendel archives are still on Columbia website. Importantly, this resource was considered important enough to be catalogued by a number of libraries, and so including JTS libraries, and several others that keep the copies. This is an interesting issue with many of those resources. Unless they are institutionalized, they will disappear. They age even worse than fish. And so, in many cases, the resources are maintained by people in their private capacity, and so they will maintain for people who would like to refer to it later. So the other aspect of Yiddish presence on the internet is in terms of websites. And so the first website was called Virtual Städte, was started in 1994. This is a public announcement in February 1995. And so Städte was the first Yiddish-related website. It was one of the first, if not the first, Jewish-related websites. In 1994, there were not that many websites in general. So for period of transition for the first 10 years, various publishers used to publish on paper what they called internet yellow pages. So there were like 100 or 1,000 pages books with the list of all websites. And in those books, in the category Judaism or Jewish websites, there were relatively few websites, including Shtetl. Shtetl is still online. It is preserved in kind of museum capacity. It's not maintained for many years. Fortunately, at some point, much larger, more powerful players came in and started doing Yiddish-related websites. But for that time, Shtetl offered a lot of the firsts, like the very first digitized Yiddish book, Aleph by Eliezer Steinberg, and so it's not just Yiddish book. It may have been one of the first digitized books, period. And people didn't digitize books yet at that time. The first digitized textbook. So that's not the entire textbook, just the first chapter of Cheryl's textbook was online in 1994, and there was no other textbook on the internet at the time in any subject. The first multilingual dictionary, Michelle just showed the multilingual dictionary from 17th century, so this one is from 20th century. The author is also in the audience. As it did as her bar mitzvah project. And it wasn't a huge dictionary, but it had like 300 words, and as you know, 300 words are responsible for about 95% of speech. The first, definitely first Yiddish, and probably first multimedia web pages, so the Yiddish songs with lyrics and music notes, and the sound. So it was not yet possible to put real sound online. So those were MIDI files, what is computer synthesized melodies that people could listen to and do karaoke with those Yiddish songs. All of those pages were made by my wife, who collected all the information and did all the work on actually creating the web pages. And it was before the age of HTML editors, so it involved a lot of manual coding of those files. She collected her own recipes, and but not just, so it's not just culinary, it's also Yiddish related. So each or every single recipe was accompanied by appropriate Sprichwörter from various collections, and they were all attributed. So for borscht, you have 2 Sprichwörter from Bernstein, and from borscht mit Brot werden the Beckenreuth, and so clearly healthy. In the one of the first scholarly papers on online humanities, it's Barbara Kirschenblatt's paper called The Electronic Vernacular, was published in 1996. So she describes Shtetl, and interestingly, which we didn't realize when we were making Shtetl, but she pointed out that the use of architectural metaphors is very important to kind of create links in people's minds to something more real than the virtual world. And she uses a very interesting example of portals that were frequently illustrated on the title pages of the old books. So שולי is the very first website for Yiddish, and so that was another collaboration with Mordechai, and for some years before Yiddish got their own web domain, it was residing in Shtetl. Shtetl was very popular. So this is just a number of snapshots from early years, and you can see the number of visitors in the first column and the number of hits. So, and this is per month. So by 2000 there were about 10,000 visitors per month, and they were watching hundreds of thousands of pages. Shtetl was mentioned in a number of major newspapers and magazines around the world. It was linked to as a resource from early online editions of Encyclopedia Britannica and Carta. So it is also fortunately catalogued by several libraries, including JTS as well. To finish, I would like to say that, and I'm in the interest of time, I have to skip on a number of other very interesting developments in both early and not so early Yiddish internet. But I would like to mention several areas where we have really significant achievements. So, digitizing books, and we have not all Yiddish books are digitized, but a good portion of them is digitized, and so the periodicals. It is less complete coverage with the periodicals, but hopefully we are going there. We all know that online teaching and learning is flourishing now, including in Yiddish. There are many online events which again helps community like Yiddish communities, which are not necessarily concentrated in a single space, although I need to be careful saying this in Colombia, but in many other places it's less well than here. It is also very important that with online communication, in addition to just enabling people to talk, to exchange ideas and opinions, there are some other advantages that are not even necessarily present in non-virtual world. The issues like equalized status of participants and not so visible power relationships help people to express themselves more freely, and in many cases it's good. Not necessarily in all cases, but in many cases it is. So there are a lot of crowdsourcing going on, various collaborative projects. This new fancy word for taxonomy, where people annotate things together, and again there are some examples in which there are more things that can be done. The second half of this slide are things that kind of can be better, and we still don't have a very comprehensive navigational pointers for Yiddish internet. There are many websites that are good, but there is no site that is very good and can be used as as a one-stop shopping for everything Yiddish on the internet. We have books and periodicals digitized reasonably well, not so with archives. And there is a corpus of modern Yiddish online. There are also a couple of commercial projects, but we're still behind. And that's another area where internet is kind of intrinsically useful to do it well. And finally, I wanted to show the Yiddish Wikipedia, which is not doing well. Now it doesn't make sense to compare Yiddish Wikipedia with English or French or German or Spanish Wikipedia with millions of articles, but comparing with languages with a similar number of speakers. And so I used three: Basque, Esperanto, and Asturian, and you can see that all of those have like 400,000, 300,000 Wikipedia articles. And the last column is the number of active users. So you can see that in Yiddish, the number of articles is an order of magnitude smaller than in Basque or Asturian, and this is a shame. So those of you who have students, make them write Wikipedia articles with credit, and so that we don't have this table anymore. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the last presentation on this panel, we have the pleasure of hearing from two speakers who will be speaking on Yiddish treasures in the Jewish Theological Seminary Library. And I'm just going to give a little aside. My first library job was at JTS, which is the training ground for many Judaica librarians. Michelle worked there. And I just wanted to mention that there's going to be a program for a Judaica librarianship certification at JTS starting in September. So March, sorry. Okay, but if anyone is interested, you can ask for more information. Okay, now back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, so we'll be hearing from Dr. David Kramer and Naomi Steinberger. Dr. David Kramer has his PhD from the Jewish Theological Seminary, which he received in 1984. His focus as a professor is on the literary analysis of rabbinic literature, rabbinic ritual, and the social and religious history of Jews in late antiquity. He accepted the position of librarian in 2004 and has since played a crucial role in forging policy and expanding the impact of the library's world-renowned collections and programs. He is a prolific author and has written many books and articles. His books range from responses to suffering in classical rabbinic literature to Jewish eating and identity, and others. And Naomi Steinberger is Director of Library Services at the Library of the Jewish Theological Seminary, where she has worked since 1987. She has an MS in Library Services from Columbia University and an MA in Musicology from Bar-Ilan University. She has written articles on library databases, particularly in the fields of music and Judaica. And now, Yiddish treasures in the JTS library. And I guess it's up to you how you will put it.
I'll sit down while you talk.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I don't know who's in charge, but what time should we, how's the timing?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, that's fine? Okay, so, I mean, thank you for the invitation. It's really our pleasure to be here. When we received the invitation to participate, we realized that there were two very considerable obstacles in front of us. One is the fact that, as any of you who has had anything to do with the world of collections of Judaica at any time and place knows, the JTS library is just this absolutely extraordinary resource, and it is literally impossible to master the whole. There are legends about Alexander Marx. I can't attest to the accuracy of those in his command of the collection. I do know that our colleague still alive, Menachem Schmelzer, was just, an extraordinary master of our rare collections. But speaking for myself, I know that and I don't imagine anyone will ever be able to master the collection in those ways. So that was challenge number one. We've got a huge amount in whatever the field is, including here, but we don't have a complete mastery of it, meaning individually we don't. Secondly, the challenge was that we do not have an expert in our Yiddish collections. But of course that's merely saying what we would say about a lot of fields, which is that a library's collections, any research library's collections, including ours in Judaica, are so diverse that it's impossible to imagine having experts in the many fields where the collections are made. So it came before us to ask, how are we going to tell the story of what's available to you, people who are interested in these fields, people who might be engaged in research. And we actually are in a very unique position with respect to our Yiddish collections that allows us to tell a very particular story, and it's that story that we'd like to share with you. We mean for it to exemplify the kinds of work that you can do in our collections as well. So the story goes like this. Annie, right? Oh, good. From eyes. Okay, perfect. So the story goes like this. We were very fortunate just a few years ago to get a very generous gift to support our collecting and collections in Yiddish and everything related to Yiddish. So that puts us in a very good position both to come to further command of our collections and to expand them. One of the things that the donor requested, quite reasonably, knowing that the new JTS library would be opening with galleries for exhibition, is that there be as part of the funding, that some of the funding would fund an exhibition devoted to Yiddish, which she described in the most general terms possible. But then, as we sat down with her, realizing that we really wanted to fulfill her wishes in this respect, it became clear, in this conversation, that she was interested in an exhibition that would state to the world the vibrancy, the life of Yiddish as a language and culture, not necessarily in New York, but certainly in New York, amongst other places, in the 20th century. Religious connections might be part of that, but she really wanted to be able to express, to teach through this exhibition about Yiddish as a broad culture, as a culture amongst cultures, in the most diverse ways we can think about it, and again, not just in terms of the stereotype that many people, not yourselves of course, but many people bring to their thinking about Yiddish and Yiddish culture. So that was our task, and we began to plan for this exhibition, which will open in April of 23 and last for several months. We began to plan for it the most recent couple of months. And how does one begin such an exploration? You need an expert search. You need to know what your parameters are. What are you looking for? And you enter those parameters and you begin to see what accumulates in front of you. So my friend and colleague Naomi Steinberger, who is one of the most masterful searchers one could ever hope to find. When I have personal research needs, rather than doing it the normal way, I say, Naomi, can you help me with this? But in any case, we sat down together knowing in broad terms what we were looking for. As we began to do this, we also reached out to David Fishman, who recommended Annie, one of his graduate students, to work with us and help us to identify materials and begin to conceive of how this would be shaped. So all of this was put together, and what we are going to do now is quite simply to show how we have undertaken this research project and what we've discovered in the course of doing so. So Naomi Steinberg.
This is by no means a comprehensive list of everything that we have in Yiddish. And we had actually a mandate, as David said, from the donor to talk about the vibrant Yiddish life. Nothing having to do with Shelo Chivot, the sponsor, nothing having to do with anything with Techinot or other religious texts or biblical commentaries. She wanted, something that was lively and spoke it to her and the memory of her parents who grew up and landed on the Lower East Side of New York. When Dave and I started talking to Annie, my first search was a much broader search of what do we have in various secular Yiddish items in our collection. And then somehow we honed in, and I think this was an Annie Cohen suggestion, on Yiddish in New York. And lo and behold, doing some search parameters, Yiddish and New York, we came up with thousands and thousands of items. And I could say when I first sent the list to Annie, she came up with hundreds of items that she wanted to look at. So what I did from this broad Yiddish New York, and I'm only going to show you that piece of it, was to break it down into different categories. But how did I do this search? I basically put in some search parameters. The language was Yiddish. The location of the place of publication was New York. And then played around with that, basically. So, as you can see, I had exported one big Excel file, and then I used the column here with the subject headings as a librarian to hone in on how to break this down into different categories. So if you look here, and this is just actually, it really is a snapshot. Things that we have about Yiddish in New York, we have about Yiddish in plenty of other places in the world too. I would say clearly Vilna and Warsaw and Eastern Europe, but also in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem and in other places as well, Moscow and Kiev and St. Petersburg, but also other places such as in South America or even in South Africa, where Yiddish culture thrives due to the population of Jews who landed in these places. So this first category, and the highlights are Annie's, I must say, of things that she's looking for. And when you come to our exhibit, you'll see even fewer of these items because our exhibition space only will fit, 50 to 70 items, given that we'll see some of them are very small. So almanacs and calendars really tell the story of, can tell you different, the Jewish calendars, the Luach from different years. Oh, we also talked about pre-World War II period. But basically, Annie honed in on post-World War, in between the world wars. There are a few earlier items too, because they're really so interesting, because that was when there was a huge influx of Jews coming from Eastern Europe and Yiddish-speaking Jews. So basically a standard calendar, a calendar, a luach that people would have, and then, or from the Forvitz that we would have, or different kinds of calendars. Archival collections, this is only a snapshot of archives that we have that have Yiddish material. We have rich music archives with a lot of Yiddish music. We have general archival collections where your Yehoash collection, which I know David Fishman is very familiar with, and others who had a lot of correspondence and can do, have a lot of more material.
Broadsides and prints.
Well, let's look at, I can't remember if the art we're going to skip Bible because we're looking at secular works. Let's look at broadsides and prints. Our broadside collection, we have about 6,000 broadsides in our collection. Broadsides are just flat, one-sided pieces of paper. Usually they're printed, sometimes they're manuscripts. And on these, particularly in the world of Yiddish, are posters or announcements or could be anything. Appeal for finance for a sick person, appearance of the Beit Din, dinim u'minhagim, this is something religious. This I did by the call number. This is our call numbers for broadsides. Announcements and coupons and appeals and keep going on and on and on. Yiddish farmer. Very, very rich collection of broadsides. And these are only those, as you can see, that were printed in New York. We have broadsides from all over. Children's, let's go to children's literature. Another very rich selection of items that we've got here. Only a few cookbooks showed up from New York. Here, wait. Let's go to health, human, sex, and sleep. So there are definitely manuals for various health conditions that the Jews in New York wanted to have in Yiddish because that was the language that they spoke. These are related to each other. Labor and socialism. So New York, obviously many of the Jews who came to New York were labor Zionists, they were socialists, and they produced a lot of books, and we'll get to periodicals later on. Literature is pretty obvious that we've got all this Yiddish literature. I think Michelle mentioned things, and Yosef mentioned things. Music, rich collection of Jewish music, both sheet music, of songs, and these are just the ones that were produced in New York. The organizations are very interesting because what we've got here are Yiddish organizations that were created in New York during the first part of the 20th century, pre-World War II. Many of them come from different workmen's circles, Bialystok, National Junger Arbeiter, also constitutions and bylaws of all these different communities, Yiddish communities within New York, people who, Landsmannschaft, who came from different places all around, from Europe, periodicals. So we have a rich collection of periodicals in Yiddish. It's something we would love to digitize one day. And actually, now that we at least have the list of the New York periodicals, we can send it to the project and say, this is what we've got. At least these are the titles. We haven't gone into the issues, but we have many. Some of them we just have one issue. Some of them are only printed in one or two issues. And others, we have full runs. Luckily, before we get to the postcards, a number of years ago, we had, from the Atran Foundation, we had funding to catalog our Yiddish periodicals collection and some other Yiddish books. So we have a pretty rich listing of all of them. The postcards, that was also, we had a grant from the Gladys Keeble Delmas Foundation a number of years ago to digitize, catalog and digitize our postcard collection. And we have literally thousands of postcards. These are ones that were actually printed in New York, mostly by the Williamsburg Art Company. A lot of them were printed in Germany, early 20th century. They're wonderful, tell the social history. I think you've pulled out a whole bunch of them as potentials. The sciences are kind of interesting. There are a few, but they talk about, let's look at Soviet. All right, so also lots of discussion of Soviet life. There was also something on communism. I'm not sure where that came up. But we also have you gave the example of Kafka and Lenin and Stalin and all the important Soviet writers and leaders, all translated, Tolstoy, Emil Zola, all translated into Yiddish. There's also a whole section on Shakespeare in Yiddish as well. Women, a few things on women, the working class. Actually, World War II has a few items. Also about the Jews during personal anatomy and Zionism. There are many, many works on Zionism. So this is just an example of how we went about looking for material for a specific and honing in on something. It's a little bit of a lesson in search strategy and how to, if you're looking for something, you start out with a broad topic, you hone in slowly and look and try to refine. You use the Library of Congress subject headings to help you through. You use call numbers, which are very specific. The DS-149 in this case. There's a history, Zionist history. To just do a little more research in getting towards what you want. We're also happy in the library to help anyone and everyone, both locally and and remotely, in doing some of these searches. Some of our Yiddish material is digitized. I would say our postcards are digitized. Some of the manuscripts, because we have a large digitization project for manuscripts, are digitized, not our printed books. We have not digitized printed books. Some of our broadsides are digitized, particularly the unique ones, and we plan to do more of that. And I welcome you to come to the library, either in person or close by, if you're local, and if you're not local, you can email us at library@jtsa.edu for any questions you may have in trying to locate material.
Yeah, and Naomi, the only thing that's worth adding is, you emphasize it, but it's worth emphasizing again that we begin here with very limited parameters. New York, the language obviously, right. But during certain years, if you expand this, you can see what the wealth of return was in this very limited search. So imagine that for any other kind of parameters you might be searching. And what doesn't come up here at all are the Yiddish manuscripts, of which we have hundreds.
Hundreds and hundreds. I think it was like 400 or 500.
Right, that's right.
Yiddish
so,
manuscripts.
there's a lot that doesn't, in our collection that's not reflected here, but is also worth pursuing. So as Naomi says, we invite you. We're at your service.
Right. The other thing is you could take it from another vantage point. You could say, all right, I'm doing research on Yiddish theater, not New York, but you could just put in Yiddish theater, and then you'll come up with Yiddish theater material from all over the world. So, invited to come,
You mentioned that a lot of these are being digitized. When you're creating a exhibition, what if you've already digitized all the items, and what are we displaying? Are they the originals?
Oh, the originals will be on display. The only time we'll do a facsimile is if we have an object where we want to show more than one opening. And we choose the best one, and then the second bust we'll digitize and have it as. We're not digitizing our printed books right now. We are focusing on manuscripts, and we've had some projects when I didn't mention sound, we've had some projects to digitize postcards and some broadsides. I do want to talk about the audio-visual collection as well. We've done quite a bit of digitization of lectures at JTS. I have not done work on, because it was outside the scope of what we're looking for this exhibit, but of lectures that were given in Yiddish. And we're right now doing a lot more digitization in that area on a project to digitize material, lectures and events such as this, having from at JTS or related to JTS from 1949 through the end of the 1990s. And that is slowly going to become available. We've done the first 200 or so items. They're not necessarily in Yiddish, but we know that there will be material in Yiddish. You have a question?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, kind of on that theme, compared to like a lot of the other Yiddish archives, like even just in New York, Evo, and other places, is there anything that kind of stands out that you haven't seen replicated in your collection, in other collections? Like anything you have that you think is distinct? And if so, were there any trends or any like surprising things? Like, oh, there's a lot of books or pamphlets or whatever from this specific place or organization or something that was just like surprising. Like that.
I would say that as far as the books were concerned, and when we did this Yiddish cataloging project a few years ago, we noted when it was available elsewhere in New York, and we emphasized items that were not available elsewhere in New York. I would say the other major collections where we find them would be at Evo or New York Public Library or Columbia, YU, and other places like that. What I would say would be unique to obviously the manuscripts, the archival collections, and the broadsides. The broadsides are, by nature, they're so ephemeral that it would surprise me if any other collection could duplicate what we had. Yeah.
The process by which piggybacking takes place in terms of sharing from one institution to another. If my collection wanted to be digitized and you had it already scanned or digitized and I had copies of it, there's programs that are written, but what's the process by which is there a sharing of materials that go from Columbia to JTS, and do you piggyback back and forth?
You want to
Maybe just to understand the question a little bit more. So you're saying that if two collections have the same item and one item is digitized?
And somebody doesn't, yes.
And so if one needs to, depends on what it is, because there are a lot of items that are exactly the same. But for something like, this is an argument I make because I work on this project, mapping printed books. Something like early print is difficult because people say, well, it's printed, so there you have 300 copies, they're all exactly the same. But at the same time, if you look at annotations, you look at use, you look at bindings, you look at size, there are actually important differences between the two. So I know we have this joint exhibition up now between Columbia and JTS that's in both locations. And we have an online exhibit. What we put in the online exhibit includes a book that was digitized by the National Library of Israel, which is not on exhibit in either location, but we included the link to this item because it's relevant to the material that we have.
So is the link the point that you stop the possession, or so to speak, or can you share it on and make it a part of yours by some mutual agreement?
Well, if it's digitized, it's sort of everybody's, unless there are rights,
so
unless you hold rights.
That's what I'm asking.
So that depends on the institution. I don't know what your...
Our policies, we ask people to request permission, which we give, and ask to be credited.
And
entire collections that are in the tens of thousands, is that...
It would be a link to our collection. It wouldn't be a link to the individual item. If there's an individual item that somebody wants to use for an online exhibit, we ask them we grant permission when requested and ask for...
And in practicality, is this going on today?
All the time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Every day. There's an exhibit now that's going up in Padua on the plague, and they're using an image that we digitized about a plague manuscript at Columbia. This happens all the time, and that's why we all want to make our materials available. It's one of the reasons, but we're all about librarians, and libraries are all about access. We want people to know what we have. We want people to use what we have. And so we're trying to get the material out there as best as we can.
And I think that was we each presented that in a very different way.
Yeah.
But it was basically the same idea. Come use our collection.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you could just answer my question, but if someone is not affiliated with JTS or Columbia or whatever, can you still get access to digitized stuff? I know I don't think I can come into the library.
You could.
I can come into the library?
Yes.
You can come into our library
To use
anything.
I can ask for a book to be brought out of the stacks.
Yes.
Unique materials is a careful distinction we make at Columbia, because the idea is that New York Public Library has a very expensive Judaica collection that most people can use. But if you want to use any of the materials that I showed in my presentation, those are all special collections. Those are all by definition unique. And then you could come and use our special collections, which are open to everybody.
And at JTS, the library is open to everybody. I would say most of our Yiddish collections are probably in offsite storage. We'd ask you first to request it so that we could bring it to you.
Yeah, and I should caveat actually on that is that many institutions require an appointment because of that. Because there's sometimes, like the LCAJ collection, which I want you all to come and use, is located off-site. So you cannot just walk into the library and use it because it'll take 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on when you order it in the time of day, to actually arrive on campus. So you can't just show up, unfortunately, but when you make an appointment, we are happy to provide you with whatever you need.
Yes.
Special.
I think that Yosef Weissman said that Mendele had been archived and was now part of the JTS collection. That I understand.
I tried to search it while he was speaking, and I
So my question is more like I'm a digital ignoramus. What does it mean to be archived? When were all the emails printed out in physical form, or
No.
what form are they now? I guess
I have a feeling, and I really need to search this, that there was a time when, early in the internet in the 90s, when we cataloged websites. This is no longer anything that you could do. You can't do that anymore. It's too vast. And I think that probably Mendele, and what was you gave, Shtetl was the other one. We probably had a link to the website, not all the data. That would be like digitizing every page of an archive.
But
That's the equivalent.
There's digital preservation is a huge problem, and again, going to that data, pages like fish, but there are a few different things that are being done. So to archive a project means that there's a server somewhere that's protected, that somebody is watching and maintaining and making sure that everything is being transferred, that when media changes, they're changing the media to, think about like our reel-to-reel tapes that were then digitized, but they were digitized in the 90s the first time, and we actually recently had a project to re-digitize everything because they were digitized before there was a preservation standard. So they were digitized for use, but not for preservation. So now the LCAJ audio is preserved because it's on multiple servers by responsible people who are watching those servers and taking care to make sure that they'll be replicated. In the LCAJ archives as well as in the Michael-Herzog archives, which we have as well, there are many, many printouts from Mendele. Many! Which clearly were, but also from like Michael-Herzog printed out all of his emails in the 90s. A lot. But that was another way that they were, because digital archiving is not something that people could even consider. So in the case of being on WorldCat, that is very clear. We have this at Columbia where I can request a website to be cataloged as a resource, so that somebody who's looking in our catalog will find the Shtetl or Mendele, but it's not being archived. Archived is something like when you go to a website and you go to the Internet Archive and you say, I want you to snap images of every single page that's here so that you can archive, so that it will be archived, and they're archived as static images. The links don't always work, but you can see it. In fact, one of the examples I always bring is the old wonderful Treasures of the JTS website, which was in Flash, and Flash no longer exists.
Oh yeah, you can access.
And if you go to the Internet Archive, you can't actually see the images, which is frustrating. But you can see because it's Flash, and Flash is no longer supported. But you can see what the website used to look like because it was captured by the Internet Archive. So there are Internet archiving projects that have to be done very systematically in order to capture them. And like Columbia has an Internet Archive program for human rights. There's the Human Rights Archive, the Digital Human Rights Archive, where the curator of that collection actually goes in and selects specific sites that she knows are in danger or should be captured. And the Internet Archive goes through, the word is crawls through the whole sites, takes photos of every single page, and then it's archived. and is searchable in sort of its own database. But it's a hugely complicated question, and something that we're all very much grappling with.
And just to add to this,
Something like Twitter.
I mean, it's the same problem. The Library of Congress tried and gave up.
so Internet Archives, it has this Wayback Machine service that does it not just once, but does it periodically.
Right,
So
over time.
There are hundreds of snapshots of many websites and resources on the Wayback Machine. The problem with the Internet Archives is that it is not properly institutionalized yet. So it's an organization that is itself in danger, in constant danger, because it is being assaulted by publishers regularly.
Right,
And,
because it has digitized books.
And just about Flash, the Flash in those cases is not supported on the browser side.
Right.
So the codes are there in most cases. So if you have a browser
You need a
that
replicator
supports
for
Flash, you
Flash.
can still see it.
Yeah.
Question for both of you. How much from the is cataloged from the collection and how much not? And what is and what not? And what is accessible online also?
It's a really interesting question because we're not even sure, I would say, what's not cataloged. We are actually making enormous headway in cataloging books that were not, older books from our collection, when many of them are in Yiddish, that were never cataloged or never. In 1966, there was a fire at the JTS library, and at the time there were 60,000 books destroyed, and about 60 or 70,000 books destroyed, and about another 60 or 70,000 books that were water damaged and put into storage. And also, at the time, many organizations and people donated books to JTS library. Those books all went into storage for a while, and over the years we've had a number of projects where we've cataloged the books. I would say probably 3/4 of them are cataloged. And I'd say thanks to the pandemic, we've sent boxes of books to one of our catalogers who's been systematically working through them and cataloging them from home. And a proportion are in Yiddish. I would say some of them, I would say like this one, I can tell by the system number. Friends of the, I don't know, some Zionist organization from 1937. That was recently cataloged because that was found amongst the 1,000 boxes that we're working through. We also had received an enormous and invaluable collection from David Roski's recently, and we're yet to catalog those treasures as well. So, as far as the broadsides are concerned, I'm not sure the proportion, but you know, no library has ever cataloged everything in its collection. And it's always an aspiration, and you keep, the wonderful thing about it is that we thought maybe we'd get a handle on the Yiddish collection, and then David Roski's gives us 1,500 Yiddish books. So there we are, back another 1,500 books.
That, you know, I think your example is that when there's so much at JTS, there's so much more to do, always. I was lucky that I came into a collection. The position had been open for 2 years before I was hired, and in the great brilliance of the person who was in charge of special collections, they actually hired a cataloger to work solely on the Judaica collection. So the majority of our codices, so manuscript bound volumes, have been cataloged, but that's only a small portion of the whole collection. So there are archives. There's an archive of political, I think it's political posters in the Bechmetek archive, which is an archive of emigrated material from the USSR. And it's a huge archive, and there's so much Yiddish in it. And a lot of these so this political poster archive, I noticed, had a subject heading of Yiddish. And I was like, oh, these aren't Russian posters, these are Yiddish posters. That's what happened with the Zazachowski collection, where we have all of these posters that he hung because he was involved in all sorts of, supporting the Spanish Civil War And he was involved in a group that was collecting money for the soldiers that went to Spain, and Yiddish-speaking communist soldiers from Paris, as described in quite a few books actually, but Zahnsma's, and so there are these posters that we just found them, and there's all sorts of things like that. I mean, the example I always love to bring is when I got a phone call from the Burke Library, which is the Union Theological Seminary's library, and the library is actually owned by Columbia. That's another story entirely. But they called me and they said, we found a bunch of scrolls in the CJK manuscript collection, so the Chinese, Japanese, Korean collection. But I think it might be Hebrew. Could you come and take a look? And sure enough, they were Esther scrolls. I mean, these things just appear in unexpected places. So yeah, I have a handle of the X manuscript collection and X893 I know is Judaica, but there's so much else in the collection that, like you said, you can't, I mean, that's the wonder of being a librarian in a kind of collection like this, is that there's constant new discoveries.
And then you get gifts.
And then, exactly.
Right.
And what's online on the
So,
catalog?
we've digitized a bulk of our manuscripts. We're getting closer to all of our manuscripts that we know, our Judaica manuscripts, which is about 1,700 codices. Call numbers, sorry. Sorry, not call numbers, volumes. But that's in both color and from microfilm. Archives are really difficult to digitize.
I'm asking about catalogs, not archive.
Oh, just catalog.
Just the catalog.
So nearly our entire collection is online, but it's much smaller.
Digitized.
Well,
we're asking about
No,
what's...
I'm just asking if the catalog is accessible online to search.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Both at JTS and at Columbia.
Not
Yes.
everything is what the reason.
Yes, this is from an open, you could do this from an open search.
That's what this Excel spreadsheet was made,
Right.
from a search in the catalog.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Are the digitized postcards you mentioned online?
Yes.
What's the question? Whether the digitized postcards.
They are, the best way to look for them is digitalcollections.jtsa.edu. Or just go to the library website and get to the catalog and you look. There's a drop down for digital collections and you can find it there. Mm-hmm.
I actually have a question for you on the Columbia collection.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in its history. Was there someone, forgive me if I missed this, was there someone systematically collecting before the chair was created in '52? How did, what's the story?
For that, I can refer you to my chapter.
No, but seriously. The history of Columbia's Judaica collection, collecting of
Judaica is one thing, but
Judaica.
Yiddish specifically.
Not Yiddish specifically, but Yiddish is included in Judaica. So they weren't systematically collecting Yiddish, but they were collecting Jewish materials. And Sally Baron, who came in 1930, was regularly sending lists to the librarian at Columbia saying, these are all the books you should buy for this year. So Columbia has books that were printed in 1939 because Sally Baron was reading all the book lists and said, you have to buy this book. You have to buy this book. And so there are books that are, and this is what I'm saying, I mean, the fact that Milroy came into our stacks was because it was bought when it was printed. And so I had no idea it was there until a graduate student emailed me and was like, why is this in the stacks? So, things like that, because Baron and before him Richard Gacahel were collecting extensively in Judaica for the collection, it
So essentially, a certain professor was ordering books, hence they were purchased.
Yeah, but it was across the field of Jewish studies.
Right.
I mean, Baron was studying.
No, of course, he's reading everything.
Comprehensive. Yeah, so that was why it was coming. But it wasn't specifically Yiddish until after. Yeah.
Silly question. Where will this exhibit take place?
Where are what?
The exhibit.
Where will
Our exhibit will be in our exhibition gallery. Right now, we have a joint exhibit about the Jews of Corfu, but JTS Columbia. Come by. This is the last week. It's going to be at JTS. I think it's going to be a little longer at Columbia. And it will be there in April. Yeah, right after Passover. We're starting it. Yeah.
So, I should probably be asking this question, not me, but SECO is going to undertake a project to catalog its very significant collection of books And my question is there any advice you could give us with respect to a program to use or an approach? Could we?
I would actually recommend getting in touch with the Books in the National Library of Israel because they just created the Yiddish, union list for Yiddish books, which is a combined project with NLI and I believe EVO and a few, are you guys on?
Yiddish
No.
Book Center and
Yiddish Book Center, a number of institutions that are trying to get a comprehensive list of all books that have been printed in Yiddish. So there are institutions that are specifically working on this, and rather than reinvent the wheel, look at what they're doing and maybe add Psychos Holdings to I think it's called the Union List for Yiddish. ULI?
Vereinigte Kataloge, Joint Catalog for Yiddish.
Yeah.
And Psycho is Zico.
Right.
Okay, thank you to all our speakers.